This story reminds us that sometimes love doesn't fade. It simply forgets how to speak. The rain had a rhythm of its own that afternoon, soft, steady, and strangely comforting. It tapped gently against the tall glass windows of Emily Carter's office. A quiet melody for a quiet life. Emily sat at her desk long after most of her coworkers had left, pretending to finish one last email she had already proofread twice. Truthfully, she was delaying the walk outside. Her umbrella had broken that morning, and the sky had not forgiven her for it. Beyond the windows, the city shimmered under the soft blur of rain. Cars hissed along wet streets, lights reflecting like watercolor strokes. Everything looked peaceful, yet inside, Emily felt a restlessness she couldn't name. At 38, she had what many would call a good life. A stable job at a design firm. A neat little house in the suburbs. A husband, Mark, who was steady and reliable. The kind of man who never forgot to pay bills or lock doors. But lately, her world had begun to feel quiet in a different way. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It's the kind that echoes. She couldn't remember the last time someone had truly asked how she was doing. Not out of politeness, but because they genuinely wanted to know. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Mark, asterisk, working late again. Don't wait up for dinner. Asterisk. Emily read the message twice, though it didn't surprise her. Mark's job had grown demanding over the years, pulling him into late-night meetings and endless deadlines. She never complained. He wasn't neglectful, just tired. They both were. Still, the message made her feel smaller somehow, as if the rain outside had found its way in. She shut down her computer, gathered her bag, and stepped into the dim hallway. The elevator ride down felt long, humming softly like a lullaby. When she stepped outside, the air was cool and filled with the scent of wet pavement. She pulled her coat tighter, trying to find shelter under the narrow awning. Her car was in the shop, and the next bus wouldn't arrive for 20 minutes. She sighed, watching the streetlights shimmer through the mist. For a moment, she simply stood there, a lone figure under a flickering light, wondering when her life had become this quiet. And then she heard a familiar voice. Emily. She turned. A silver SUV had stopped by the curb, wipers moving in slow arcs. Behind the wheel sat Daniel Walker, Mark's younger brother. Of all people, she hadn't expected him. Do you need a ride? He called out through the open window, smiling lightly. Emily hesitated. She hadn't seen Daniel since last year's Thanksgiving dinner. He was 6 years younger, spontaneous where Mark was reserved. He worked as a freelance photographer and lived 2 hours away, a man who followed the light. Rather than a schedule, part of her wanted to politely decline. But another part, the quieter, lonelier part, was grateful someone had noticed her standing there. Are you sure? She asked. I don't want to trouble you. Daniel shook his head. No trouble at all. Hop in before you catch a cold. Emily climbed into the passenger seat, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. The car was warm, faintly scented with coffee and pine air freshener. A familiar song played softly on the radio. One she hadn't heard in years. Perfect timing, she said, trying to sound casual. Or maybe lucky. He replied with a grin. I was just visiting a friend nearby. I saw you and thought, that can't be Emily standing in the rain alone. His tone was light, but kind, genuine. They drove through the city in easy silence for a while. The kind that didn't need to be filled. The rain traced thin lines down the windshield, catching the glow of passing lights. How's Mark? Daniel asked after a moment. Busy? She said softly. Always busy. Daniel nodded, his eyes on the road. He's always been that way. Even when we were kids. Focused, serious, never knew when to slow down. Emily smiled faintly. Some things never change. Her voice trailed off, and for a few seconds, the only sound was the rain. Do you ever miss it? Daniel asked suddenly. When things used to feel simpler. Emily looked at him, surprised. What do you mean? He shrugged. You know, when life wasn't all about schedules and deadlines, when you could just breathe. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched the droplets sliding across the window. merging and falling like tiny stories in motion. "I think I miss being excited about small things," she finally said. "Waking up on a Saturday and feeling like something good might happen, even if I didn't know what." Daniel smiled softly. "That's a nice way to put it." The light ahead turned red. The car slowed, and for a moment the glow of the traffic light washed over their faces, one calm, one thoughtful. Emily looked out at the rain again, but a quiet thought stayed with her. Asterisk, asterisk, when was the last time she had felt that kind of excitement? Asterisk, asterisk, when the light changed, Daniel eased the car forward. The moment passed, but something delicate lingered. Not tension, not attraction, but a gentle awareness. By the time they reached her street, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Daniel parked in front of her house, leaving the engine running. "Thank you for the ride," she said, her voice warm but distant. "Anytime," he replied. "You look tired, Em. Try to rest, okay?" It was a simple sentence, but the way he said it with sincerity, without agenda, made her heart ache in a quiet, unfamiliar way. She nodded, smiled politely, and stepped out into the mist. As she walked up the driveway, she turned once to wave. Daniel lifted his hand in return before driving off into the fog. Emily stood there for a moment, watching the taillights disappear, the rain whispering around her. She couldn't explain it, but something inside her had stirred, a feeling she hadn't known she was missing. Not love, not longing, just the reminder that somewhere beneath the routine, she was still someone who could feel something unexpected. And that small spark, born in the middle of an ordinary rainstorm, would stay with her far longer than she imagined. The morning after the rain, sunlight broke through thin clouds, spilling softly over Emily's kitchen table. The house was still. A faint scent of coffee filled the air, and somewhere down the hall, the clock ticked with gentle precision. Emily sat with her mug cupped between her hands, watching the steam rise and curl in delicate spirals. She thought of the night before, of Daniel's car headlights fading into the mist, and found herself smiling, though she didn't know why. It wasn't about Daniel, not really. It was about something deeper, something she hadn't felt in years. The feeling of being noticed, of existing in someone's world, even for a brief moment, as the sunlight warmed her face. An old memory stirred, one she hadn't revisited in a long time. It was from another rainy day many years ago, when she had just started her first job at a small community library. She was 24 then, shy, eager, and full of dreams she didn't always speak aloud. She spent her days surrounded by books and quiet stories, helping visitors find what they needed, while secretly searching for her own sense of belonging. That was when she met Mark. He had walked in on a windy October afternoon, holding a stack of worn novels. His smile had been easy, his voice calm. He asked for a recommendation, and she had nervously suggested one of her favorites, a story about second chances and quiet courage. The next week, he returned, handing the book back with a grin. "You were right," he said. "It's the kind of story that stays with you." From then on, their meetings became part of her routine. Sometimes he'd bring her coffee. Sometimes he'd linger by the counter asking about her day. He never flirted, never made grand gestures, just talked, really talked, as if her words mattered, and that was all it took, in a world that often rushed past her. Mark's patience felt like sunlight. They fell in love in small ways through quiet conversations, laughter shared over old novels, and the comfort of knowing they understood each other's silences. When he proposed 3 years later, Emily had said yes with tears in her eyes, believing that their love would stay that gentle forever. And for a long time, it did. Now, years later, as Emily sat alone in her kitchen, she thought about how life changes without asking for permission. Mark hadn't become distant overnight. It happened gradually through missed dinners, half-finished conversations, and the quiet weight of routine. He still cared. She knew that. But caring and connecting were not the same. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with her finger, remembering a line from the very book that had first brought them together. Asterisk sometimes. "Love doesn't disappear, it just forgets how to speak." Asterisk. That line had meant nothing to her back then. Now it echoed like a whisper she couldn't ignore. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside. The street glistened from last night's rain. A few sparrows perched on the fence, chirping softly as if reminding her that mornings still held their own kind of beauty. And yet, something inside her remained unsettled. A quiet ache she couldn't quite name. Later that day, while organizing files at work, she saw a message appear on her phone. Daniel, asterisk, hope you didn't catch a cold yesterday. The weather can be tricky this time of year. Asterisk, Emily smiled faintly. I didn't. Thanks again for the ride, he replied almost instantly. Asterisk, you're welcome. It was nice catching up. It's been a while since the family's gotten together, hasn't it? Asterisk, asterisk, it has. Asterisk, she typed. Too long. For a moment, her thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then she added, asterisk, you and Mark used to be close when you were younger, right? Asterisk, there was a pause before his reply came. Asterisk, we were. Then life happened, I guess. Different paths. But I still look up to him even now. Asterisk, Emily stared at the words, feeling something tender and sad at once. She didn't know why she had asked. Maybe because she wanted to understand what time could take away, and what it sometimes left behind. That night, after dinner, Emily pulled out an old photo album from the living room shelf. Dust floated in the lamplight as she opened it. There were pictures from her wedding day, her smile radiant, Mark's eyes full of calm joy. Then photos from family picnics, birthdays, and holidays, and in many of them, Daniel appeared too, laughing with that same easy warmth he still carried. In one picture, Emily stood between the brothers, holding a sparkler on New Year's Eve. The glow lit her face, and Mark's arm rested around her shoulders. Daniel, standing on her other side, was caught mid-laughter, his eyes bright with life. She stared at that image for a long time. It wasn't nostalgia for the people in it. It was nostalgia for who she had been then. The woman in the photograph looked lighter, freer, untouched by the quiet heaviness that sometimes filled her now. She closed the album gently and exhaled. The past had a strange way of reminding her of who she used to be, not to hurt her, but to whisper softly, asterisk, you haven't disappeared. You're still here, asterisk, and though she didn't know it yet, that realization, small and fragile as it was, would begin to change how she saw the days ahead. That night, as the city lights flickered beyond her window, Emily felt something shift inside her, a calm she hadn't felt in a long time. The echoes of the past didn't haunt her anymore. They simply reminded her that her heart, though quiet, still had stories left to tell, and perhaps life was waiting to tell one of them soon. The air smelled of fresh rain again, the kind that made everything seem softer, quieter. Emily stood under the awning of a small coffee shop, clutching a paper cup between her hands. It was Saturday morning, and the city was just beginning to stir. She had stopped here after her weekly visit to the bookstore downtown. It's the same one she and Mark used to go to when they were younger. But these days, she came alone. She liked the calm of the early hours. No rush, no noise, just time to think. The world, for a little while, seemed gentle again as she looked out toward the wet street. A familiar voice cut through the drizzle. Emily. She turned, startled. Standing there, holding a takeaway cup and wearing a navy jacket, was Daniel. He looked almost the same as she remembered, thoughtful eyes, quiet confidence that didn't need to be spoken. His hair was a little shorter now, his expression older, calmer. Daniel, she said, smiling. What are you doing here? Visiting a client, he replied, lifting his cup slightly. And apparently finding you instead. Talk about timing. They both laughed softly, and for a moment, the years between their last meeting felt smaller. Do you have a minute? He asked. It's been a while since we actually talked. Emily hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because she hadn't expected this morning to turn into a memory. Still, she nodded. Sure, I was just about to walk through the park. Perfect, Daniel said. Mind if I join? They walked side by side along the damp path, leaves glistening from the rain. The park smelled of earth and pine. The only sound was the soft squish of their shoes against the ground. It feels like forever since I've been here, Daniel said. I used to come here with Mark sometimes, remember? Back when we were all younger and thought life would stay simple. Emily smiled faintly. I remember. You used to take pictures of everything, even puddles. He laughed. Still do. Some habits never die. Our conversation flowed easily, about work, family, and little moments that didn't matter much but somehow did. It wasn't heavy or nostalgic. It was peaceful, like a song they both remembered the words to. At one point, Daniel stopped by a bench overlooking the pond. Let's sit for a minute, he said. Emily agreed, brushing a few raindrops from the seat before sitting down. The air was cool, and a light mist rose from the water's surface. Ducks glided quietly, leaving ripples behind them. I was actually thinking about you a few weeks ago, Daniel said, after a pause. When I drove by your street, I wondered how you've been. Emily looked at him, a little surprised. You did? Yeah, you seemed different the last time I saw you. Quieter, maybe? She smiled, though her eyes softened. Life does that to people, he nodded. True, but you always had this calm strength about you. Even when things were messy, you had a way of making it feel like it would all be okay. Emily didn't know what to say to that. Compliments made her uncomfortable, not because she didn't like them, because she wasn't used to hearing them anymore. Thank you, she said quietly. That's kind of you to say. They sat in silence for a while, the wind brushing against the trees. Emily could feel a familiar warmth growing in the air between them. Not romantic, not forbidden, just deeply human. It was the warmth of being remembered. After a few moments, Daniel spoke again, his tone softer now. Do you ever think about how different things could have been if life had gone another way? Emily tilted her head. You mean if we'd made different choices? Yeah, not just big ones, even small ones. Like, what if I hadn't offered you that ride that day? She smiled gently. Then I would have gotten soaked. He laughed, shaking his head. Fair point. Then his voice grew thoughtful. But I think about that day sometimes. Not because anything happened, but because it reminded me that people can still surprise you. Even the ones you think you already know. Emily looked at him, her heart tightening slightly. I know what you mean. Their eyes met, not with longing, but with quiet honesty. There were no unspoken promises, no misplaced emotions. Just two people recognizing something rare. Understanding. I'm glad you stopped, she said softly. It's nice to be remembered. Daniel smiled, and there was something kind in his eyes. Not pity, not regret, just warmth. You're hard to forget, Emily. You always have been. They continued walking until the rain began again, a fine drizzle that danced in the air. Daniel offered her his jacket, and she laughed, shaking her head. You always do that, she said. Try to save people from the weather. He grinned. Old habits. When they reached the corner where their paths would separate, Emily turned to him. Thank you for walking with me. Anytime, Daniel said. Then, after a brief pause, he added, You seem lighter today. Happier, maybe? Maybe it's the rain, she said with a small smile. It has a way of washing things clean. He nodded, as if understanding more than her words revealed. Take care of yourself, Em. You too, Daniel. She watched as he walked away, the rain softening his figure until he disappeared into the mist. Emily stood there for a while, feeling the cool drizzle on her face. Something inside her felt renewed, not stirred by longing, but by clarity. Sometimes, she thought, people return not to change your life, but to remind you of who you were before the noise, before the routine, before the forgetting. As she turned back toward home, a quiet peace followed her. The past had echoed long enough. Now the present was finally speaking gently, truthfully, beautifully. The rain had stopped by the next morning, leaving behind a calm that felt almost deliberate, as if the world itself had paused to breathe. Emily stood by the window, watching the sunlight stretch across the lawn. The grass sparkled with dew. and the quiet hum of distant traffic drifted through the open kitchen window. Mark sat at the table, reading the newspaper, his coffee untouched. For the first time in a long while, the silence between them didn't feel heavy. It felt expectant. Emily turned to him and spoke softly. "Mark, can we talk for a minute?" He looked up, slightly surprised. "Of course. Everything okay?" She nodded, though her heart beat faster. I wanted to say something I probably should have said a long time ago." Mark folded the paper and gave her his full attention, the same steady gaze she used to fall in love with years ago. "I know we've both been busy," she began, "and I know life isn't the same as it used to be. But lately I've been thinking a lot about us, about how far we've come and how much we've forgotten along the way." Mark's brows softened. "Forgotten." Emily nodded. "Not on purpose. Just little things. How we used to talk about everything. How we'd laugh at nothing. How we'd sit on the porch for hours doing absolutely nothing at all." She smiled faintly. "I miss that." He looked down for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "I do too," he said quietly. "I guess I didn't realize how much I'd let work take over. You've been so patient with me, Em. I'm sorry." There was no anger between them, just truth, spoken softly after years of silence. "I'm not blaming you," she said. "I just think somewhere along the way we both stopped seeing what mattered. And I don't want that to be our story." Mark's eyes glistened, though he tried to smile. "Then let's not let it be. Let's find our way back." For a moment, Emily said nothing. She simply looked at him, really looked, and realized that beneath the exhaustion and routine, the man she had loved all those years ago was still there. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was quiet, honest, and real. Later that afternoon, as the sun climbed higher, Emily decided to take a walk through the same park she and Daniel had visited the day before. The ground was still damp, but the air was warm and alive. She didn't expect to see him again, but fate, or perhaps simple timing, had other plans. Daniel stood by the pond, camera in hand, capturing the way sunlight danced on the water. When he saw her, he smiled, lowering the lens. "Emily," he said warmly, "you again. Seems the park has good timing." She replied with a gentle smile. They walked together for a while, their steps slow, unhurried. The calm between them was familiar now. No tension, no guessing, just quiet understanding. "I talked to Mark this morning," Emily said finally. Daniel glanced at her. "Yeah, I told him how I felt. About the distance between us. About wanting to find what we lost." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's good, Em. He's a good man." "He is," she said softly. "And I think I forgot that for a while. Or maybe I just forgot how to look." Daniel stopped, turning to face her. "You've always known how to look. You just needed a reason to." She smiled, touched by the kindness in his words. "Maybe, but I also wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me of something important." He waited quietly, his eyes calm. "For reminding me that feeling seen doesn't always mean wanting something new," she said. "Sometimes it just means remembering you still matter." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sunlight flickered between the trees, and a breeze carried the scent of rain and lilac. Daniel smiled, a little sadly, but with warmth. "You've always mattered, Emily, to a lot of people. I just hope you never forget it again." She felt her throat tighten, but smiled through it. "I won't." They walked back toward the park gate, the path glowing golden beneath the late afternoon sun. When they reached the end, Daniel paused. "This might sound strange," he said quietly, "but I think we met again for a reason. Not to change anything, but to help you see what you already had." Emily nodded. "I think you're right." He offered a small, respectful smile. "Take care of yourself, Em, and tell Mark I said hello." "I will," she said. Then, with one last glance, Daniel turned and walked away. Camera slung over his shoulder, sunlight following him down the path. Emily stood there for a while, feeling the warmth on her face, her heart steady. She didn't feel torn or uncertain anymore. She felt whole. When she finally turned toward home, she realized something simple yet profound. Asterisk love isn't just about who walks into your life. It's also about choosing every day to stay where your heart belongs. Asterisk that evening, Emily and Mark sat on the porch together, the air filled with the hum of crickets and the faint glow of sunset. For the first time in years, they really talked about dreams, fears, and all the small things they'd let slip away. When Mark reached for her hand, she didn't hesitate, and as the sky deepened into twilight, Emily felt an unmistakable peace, the kind that doesn't need words, the kind that stays. Asterisk, because sometimes the most surprising thing isn't what happens during an unexpected ride. It's what your heart learns once you finally find your way home. Asterisk, if you enjoyed Emily's journey. Remember, every heart deserves to be seen.